Okay, can you hear me okay? Hopefully you can. Okay, I see I'm live, so I'm going to go. Okay, sorry about it before. I think Ubuntu just needed to do its thing. Right, so, yes. So when Mark was talking to me about doing this, I said yes, obviously. I was very grateful for this, and it's great to do this. I don't think I ever said to Mark my distrust of the metaverse, which is interesting. Having given this presentation, but I will give you some of the things that and some things that could help to improve the metaverse, and they kind of come from the stuff that we're doing with in the BBC and in the decentralized web and stuff like that. So, I'm Ian Forrester. I'm BBC R+D, and I'm the senior fire starter. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. Okay, so yes, I work for BBC R+D, a department called Future Experiences and Technology, kind of making data and tech work for a better society. It's something I heard, and I think it probably fits perfectly. So I want to caveat all of this. And if my colleagues are watching, they'll probably be tearing their hair out. Sometimes I forget my world is not the mainstream yet, and a lot of the same things that I will be talking about will be quite out there. But I think they're important, and I think it's important to discuss this. And to be fair, yeah, this is future artists. This is what we're meant to be doing. So. This is something I live by. You can never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. By Buckminster Fuller. And I really do believe that. I think we're on our way to doing that. So let's talk about the decentralized web. I was kind of like decentralized web, dweb, Web3, this whole bunch of things, but also the metaverse. So as I was kind of saying at the beginning, when I first heard of metaverse, and I've heard this term many, many times, like a long, long time ago, I instantly kind of my kind of the hairs on the back of my head, kind of just the very little hairs on the back of my head, just kind of spike a little bit. And it's amazing. I mean, seeing Fatboy Slim, as you saw, doing that kind of concert, for charity is great. All these things are amazing. But we have to look a little bit deeper. This is what I think about when I think about the metaverse. I do think about kind of Wall-E. I think about these kind of pods, and we're in these pods and we're being kind of entertained and we're doing our own thing. And yes, you'll communicate with people. And this is kind of what we're doing, I guess, with COVID-19. We're in our kind of our own spaces, and we're not able to kind of meet each other and all those kind of things. But I think it's important to look at that and kind of go, well, okay, that's where we are right now, but can we make that better? So these pods go a little bit deeper, and there is something that Douglas Rushkoff wrote, which I thought was quite interesting, and all of the slides will be available. I will be able to create a PDF very quickly, and I will share it on the Facebook group, so you can all kind of go through it and dig through the URLs. His piece about how the privilege have entered their escape pods was really interesting in the time of COVID-19. And this kind of technology gave us the dream of a cocoon future, and now we're living it. It's so just spot on right now. And we've got to be very careful with all this, because we have kind of escaped all the stuff that's going on, and actually that stuff is still going on, and we need to kind of consider that. So when you strap on your VR headset, or you're looking through your phone, an AR piece and stuff like that, think about what's really going on around you, not just this artificial reality, this metaverse, or simulated reality. And I think this is, I don't agree with all this, but I find it interesting about the view of a technology pioneer and this idea of kind of trying to simulate the ideal woman, which is quite scary and worries me deeply. And I think we should all be worried about this. And it goes on. And I think this kind of like floating in your virtual bubbles, is kind of quite a scary thing. So, I live in a flat quite high up, and I do think, well, okay, so I'm high, I'm in my flat, I'm okay, everything's fine. But there's a lot that's going on. There's people dying, a lot of people dying. People are having to go and work, in the real world. It's all these things that we need to just not ignore. They're important, and they're really important, and I love this kind of harsh reality, demand of people living in a real world with women and people of color. That kind of just hits the tone perfectly. So, what do you mean messy reality? Well, there's already been many kind of protests against stuff like the Google bus in San Francisco. And obviously there's the Black Lives Matter protests last year. And, you can imagine that in the metaverse, which is kind of clean, cut, perfect, there's it's like a nice retreat from all the harsh reality which is going on. And I'm not saying that that's not a good thing. I'm saying that we just need to balance it. And I think that's kind of where I'm going with this. We need to balance this and not kind of shut this out and ignore what's going on. So, I think part of that is that it's like public service, and public service could really help in this area, especially when it comes to our charter. Also, I work for the BBC, so this is really important. But I think public service can help to bring some of this stuff in, or to counter some of the kind of the narratives which are being pushed from let's say for now Silicon Valley. The metaverse is going to be beautiful, you should all be part of it. Oh, you can't afford it, well, that's a real shame. That kind of stuff, because technology without direction is horrible. So if you've not seen, there is an app which I'm gonna, well, I don't know if it's swearing or not, but it's Snap Crap. That's the name of the app, and it basically, you take pictures of humans and animal poo in San Francisco, and you mark it on a map. And that feels to me the problem with some of the technology. It's like, well, instead of solving the problem and trying to help in that, and the problem, we're just kind of making these band-aids on top of the problem. And we need to solve the problem, not kind of run away and go, it's being dealt with by somebody. I'm the marker on the map. That's not good enough. I love this bit, just to clarify, this kind of guardian boundary. I just think it's kind of such a great quote, but it's an important one. There is a lot going on that we need to think about. So, okay, so I'm sorry, I had to add that, and there's a bit more you'll see. So the question is always, who has the power? And when I mean by power, I mean who has the control? Who really has the control? A lot of these devices cost a lot of money. They're being run by kind of massive corporations. So let's look at what happened with Facebook and the Facebook login for the Oculus Quest. I have friends who are not on Facebook. They refuse to be on Facebook, or they got booted off Facebook because their name wasn't classed as a real name. So I love my air quotes. So you'll see that a lot. And how can they then participate in the metaverse without, if they can't buy these devices and use these devices, And it's kind of like, it's a little thing, but it starts to, you can see that growing and growing, and it's a real question that we really need to ask ourselves. Also, let's be clear. Silicon Valley is driven by the surveillance capitalism. And if you know what surveillance capitalism is, I highly recommend you go check it out. There's so much about this, and there's a really big book by, I cannot remember her name right now, but I think it's actually called In the Age of Surveillance Capitalism. I'm sure someone will put it in the chat, which I can't see right now. But do have a read, or there's a load of videos which will give you in about an hour or 2 hours, which are worth watching. But it's really important that these tools and these things are not given for free. There's a reason why, or they're not given for a price. There's a lot more of that's going on, and we need to think about that when we're building these experiences. So yes, what is surveillance capitalism in the metaverse? And I don't know, and this is an honest question, but I bet you it's there. I bet there are companies that are thinking about how to surveil, how much data they can collect, what they can do with that data, all those kind of things, and they're reducing the price to get it into people's hands, because they know that they can make money off the data. And some of the data is very rich, biometric data, locational data. All of these things are being kind of basically hoovered up, and we need to be very careful of that. So there's some good stuff as well. I don't want to be a downer. I'm sorry. I know this is like the start of the thing, but there's some really good stuff as well. I mean, like, I really loved Google Cardboard, and the key thing about the purpose of Cardboard was that bottom left, is the immersive experiences for everybody. That was quite an important thing. Okay, so for Google, it meant that everyone had to have a Google phone or some kind of phone, but it brought the barrier right down. And I think that's important to think about, so that people could just make their own cardboard even. I've seen people do that. They just get the instructions, print it out, and start making it themselves. They still need a phone, yes, but that brings it down to the level where almost anyone could use it and could do things with it. Everybody can build and participate, and the participation is interesting, but the build is also interesting. So there's also there are other creators who are building and open sourcing their works, which is great, like the Holo Kit. I don't know if you've seen that, but it looks really good. And also Google just recently open source tilt brush, which is amazing. And as we said, this is a rare move for a company like this, like a really rare move. Why would they do that? But the other thing that's scary for me is that the amount of artists, like yourselves, who were using tilt brush as their platform of choice. And you can be very careful of that lock-in, We're also doing something similar to this. So we've built this thing called Adaptive Podcasting, which is an app, and we're going to open source the lot at some point. So you're about to create immersive audio experiences which use the sensors on your phone and the data on your phone to create immersive stories. If you're interested, come and talk to me. During or after. My email address will be on the end of the slide anyway. Anyway, so what's our public service in the metaverse right now? So we've actually done some stuff. This is, if you remember Second Life, we actually had the big weekend, the BBC One big weekend in Second Life. And this is quite a long time ago. This is probably about this is probably more than that. Long ago, maybe 12 years ago. So you basically get these radios, and you can carry them around Second Life on our island, and you'd be kind of blasting out BBC Radio 1, the concert, and it was quite fun to see how people do that. Okay, it's a little thing, but it's something that we did quite a while ago as a trial, and this is what we do in R&D: is we try these things. So. It's a bit weird. I'm not going to play a video, but there is a video which is about our public service AR project, and it's all about using AR for public purposes. So, for example, it will tell you how many steps you've taken and how that compares to the Eiffel Tower, for example, and other things like that. So it's like a 10-minute video, but it's worth watching. I won't play it now. Oh, I won't play it now, but I'm not going to play it now. Sorry. Okay. So also, Google Slides does weird things. So there was a thing called the Web VR Starter Kit, and this goes back into the stuff about not just consuming these experiences, but also partaking and actually creating these experiences. A guy called Brian Chills built a thing called the Web VR Starter Kit, and it allowed anybody with a cheap phone and a cardboard to basically start making their own scenes. And so they were able to make their own scenes and share it with friends and with the world. And they were able to do it not just on a high-powered PC or laptop. They were able to do this from a library PC. We're very locked down because it was using just the website. It was all done client side in the browser. You could share the URL, and then it would that would be it. You wouldn't. There was no server-side bits. There was nothing to install. All that kind of stuff. And actually, funny enough, we're doing something very similar for the editor for adaptive podcasting as well. That's obviously got overtaken by A-Frame, which I'm sure all of you are aware of. Oh no.
I want to talk.
Move on. Okay. Once again, a video that is worth watching. It's about 10 minutes long, so I didn't want to play it now. So let's talk about the next generation of the internet. Where are we now? So this, our interest is about the public service in the age of the internet. How can public service continue when all of the platforms are basically trying to make money and trying to use data against the user, that kind of thing? Well, we've been looking at this quite heavily, and we think that this could be, or I believe this is the future of public service, full stop. So we did some surveys in last year, and this is kind of like some of the results. It's important to have more control, access to data. It's important to have simpler ways to manage personal data. It's important that you can easily revoke access. All of these things are the stuff that the public are now saying. And this is not me doing this. This is not my friends. This is an actual audience survey on the BBC. It's clear that there are low levels of public trust, about how organizations are using data. And this is kind of where we've been looking. This is some of the work that we've been very, very focused on. We also know that a centralized model has its limits. There's a lot of things that can happen. There's some good things and some bad things. And this is something that we're working hard on to understand when it's good and when it's bad and how it can be used or how to use it more responsibly. Because if it's given to this person who wants to move fast and break democracy, then we're all in trouble. And a centralized model tends to have a single point of failure or misuse, and that's really worrying. So once again, if your Oculus is tied to Facebook, your WhatsApp is tied to Facebook, your Instagram is tied to Facebook, it's very hard to break away from that. It isn't just Facebook. I'll be clear. There's also all the other corporations, including Google and Apple, are trying to do a similar thing. But with Facebook, they are weaponizing psychology, and this is really interesting. So if I say Cambridge Analytica, you all know what I'm talking about. If you don't, then you should really look and see what's really going on. But to give you a quick hint, there's these things called dark patterns, and there's already a bunch of people interested in how can you apply some of these dark patterns to the metaverse. Force people to go through certain things, force people to pay for things that they didn't want to pay for, force people into areas where they didn't really want to go, stuff like that. And it's kind of like, it's a very interesting area, but also it's a very scary area, because we already know that this has such a bad effect on the web right now. So Tim Berners-Lee, creator of the web, wants to fix a broken internet, and so do we. We want to fix this. We want to make the internet a better experience for for the general public. That's our ultimate aim, and also how can public service fit and kind of flourish in the the internet age. It's really important. So Tim Berners-Lee has been working on a thing called Solid, which I'll talk about in a minute, but it's a personal data store. So rather than you give the data to the organization, you keep the data, and then you control how the data gets used. Who chooses to, how, when they ask for the request of data, what happens? Do you allow that? Do you not allow that? How much do you allow? Do you cut it off? And this goes back to some of the questions that, or sort of things that came from the survey of what the audience are after. They were kind of after some control over that data. Because right now, if you go through the Facebook, privacy controls, you'll be there for about 5 minutes. It's a bit of it's an interesting place, let's put it that way. So Tim Berners-Lee's got a thing called Solid, which is the personal data store. And this is important for us because trust is the foundation of the BBC. We are independent, impartial, and honest. And this fits perfectly with what a public service organization should be doing. Rather than trust us with your data, would it be better if we kind of provide the tools so you can then just allow us to access your data under your control? I think that's a better way than just trust us, don't worry. I think we're trying to enable the public to have control of their own data. So as we've got here, the BBC Box project, it's from BBC News. BBC does not want to store your data, and that's quite a scary thing for most of those corporations who want that data because they basically monetize that data, But it's more than just a kind of a personal data store. This is also about education. This is about the platform. This is about the user experience. This is about data governance. This is about services. This is a big project, a really big project. It isn't just about providing, here you go, here's your data store, but see you later. That's not going to work, because if you give a personal data store to someone, how do they use it? What is the education? How does that work? And it's a very difficult thing to go, right, your data is here, and you have to enable access each time. That's also quite a scary thing for a lot of people. They kind of go, well, do I have to enable it every single time? If you look at the way that permissions are used on phones, most people just go, yeah, accept all the time, ignore it. Just, I don't want to see it again. And we want to have some education about how important it isn't just to do that, but to also have a think about what is actually going on. What is the trade that you're doing? How do you revoke that? Stuff like that. So also, and that's what the BBC Box project it's quite a big project, but I also wanted to talk about some of the stuff that I'm doing around distributed and a fairer internet. And this goes into the decentralized and internet. And this is quite, we're still kind of getting this off the ground, but it's quite an important one, because people still believe that that the kind of centralized model is the only way it works. Now, actually, we all know, well, hopefully we all know, the internet was never built that way, but it has become that way. So, when, for example, when Amazon goes down, half of the internet goes down. That's worrying. That shouldn't be that way. There is these cables in the ground. There's undersea cables. There's satellite. There's all these different ways. The internet's built in a way where it shouldn't be centralized, but it's starting to become centralized. And we need to worry about that, and we need to think more about that. So if you've not seen this before, the centralized model, everything goes into the center. So imagine if your Oculus Rift, your new one that you bought, imagine if Facebook kind of went down for a little while and you couldn't log in, then you're basically a little bit screwed. That shouldn't be the case. It should be more of a decentralized model. Maybe goes and talks to Facebook if you would like, if you allow it, but you shouldn't depend on it. And then you have this more distributed model, which is the way that the internet was originally made. And you do have bigger servers than other servers, but it should be more distributed. Or if you look at if you are one of the people that suddenly jumped to Signal, and there's been a lot of people I've noticed on my phone that have switched from WhatsApp to Signal. If you think about that a little bit more, like centralized versus decentralized. And also, there's some really amazing things that can happen with, for example, peer-to-peer. So, in what's happening in Hong Kong, with them being able to mark and say that there's something happening here, and that being shared from node to node around the crowd, rather than to some external kind of company or external service, to basically make sure that there is some protection for all the people that are in the crowd. And so there's some real advantages to these technologies, and we've kind of ignored them. So my interest has always been about this decentralized web, kind of going back to decentralized and distributed more so. But I'm looking for the applications. I'm looking for, because like the notion of, yes, this does it in this way, and that's basically what email does. It's not that, it isn't that interesting, but there's a bunch of companies that are starting to look at this and go, oh, we can do more on top of this. We can do more interesting things. And that's something that I'm really interested in. And I wanted to share this with you because it's something that you may not be aware of, but I wanted to make sure that you were aware. So there's a thing called the fediverse, which is the federated universe, and there's a lot. So if I say Mastodon, PixelFed, all these other kind of different services. So for example, PixelFed is like Instagram, but it's decentralized. It's federated. PeerTube is, as you can imagine, is YouTube, but it's federated, and that allows different things that you couldn't do on YouTube, you couldn't do on Instagram, and those are really interesting. And these are the things that I'm looking at and researching. And this is actually not just a niche thing; it's growing all the time. So this is on the top is the current number, but actually the one below is what it used to be when I last did a presentation like this, and it's all powered by a thing called ActivityPub. Now, if you've heard that Jack from Twitter, he keeps on talking about he wants to decentralize Twitter, and there's more news about it just recently, and I think he is quite serious about this, and it seems to be pushing a thing called Blue Sky, and he likes the idea of Twitter being a client of that. Now, there's different ways that you could do this, but he seems to be going for the kind of like create a kind of its own blockchain type system and doing it that way. Some of the other examples I've seen are using this thing called I know I was going to forget the name of it now. This other service, this other protocol, and I can't remember the name of it right now, sorry. But the one on the right is ActivityPub, and that's the one that uses Mastodon, Fediverse, all the federated services, and it's very popular and it's really good. And that's something that a lot of people are really pushing as the way forward. So there's different competing protocols. They do similar things, but they each have their own unique characteristics which are better than others. But ultimately, we want to make a better social network. We want these kind of things. We want it to work offline. I mean, how great would it be to it worked offline? We want it open source so you can start to create different clients and you can start to fiddle with it and you can fit it into the metaverse, for example. Stuff like that. And the nice thing about all of this is that they should be an open protocol, ideally one open protocol. We're not going to quite get there, I don't think, but you can imagine, this is how ActivityPub works right now, but imagine if you can add more different types of experiences. So maybe some more kind of metaverse type things in there as well. So I wanted to just kind of take a step back and go, okay, that's great. I understand all that. But how am I going to work with this stuff? 40 million sounds like a great number, but it's kind of it isn't like about the numbers. It's not about the, I'm not going to get 40 million people viewing my content right now, and I need to make a living. And I don't think this is correct, but I think it's close. I think scale is the enemy of humanity. I think we get to a point where we're trying to scale so much that we basically kind of do damage to the overall system, and we need to be very careful of that. Kevin Kelly, who's this person here, wrote this I guess an essay about 1,000 true fans, and what he was saying was basically, it's worth reading, but here's the kind of the main points: is that if you can get 1,000 true fans, like true people who not just followers, people who really care and are happy to pay a small amount of money, like what's happening with Patreon and stuff like this, then you could probably earn enough to live a good living. These calculations maybe not quite right, but 100,000 per year sounds like a good living. And I think actually somewhere in there is the change of the way we approach this. It's not about the numbers. It's not about just kind of engaging people with, like, I've got this in front of people. It's about that deeper relationship with the people that are formerly known as the audience. So there's this person who Darius, who has this site which is actually on the fediverse called FriendCamp. FriendCamp is a Mastodon service, but the unique thing is that it only takes 50 users, and each of those users pay a small amount of money, to be part of FriendCamp. And obviously, in those kind of 50. Within that kind of small walls, it's not really walls, because you can still talk to people outside. There is a kind of quite powerful, unique kind of, everyone knows each other. It's like a neighborhood, and obviously he makes enough money, and also he contributes enough that he can run the service and do more for everyone. And I think stuff like that is kind of like early days, but I think that they're quite powerful, and I think it's worth looking at. And this is I think this is where we're going, kind of human scale, and human is the important thing. Oh, no. Okay. So one of the things that we're very focused on is changing that measurement. It's about that connection. It's not about the numbers. It's about, what is your service actually doing to fulfill the person's actual human values? These are our human values that we've been working on, and I mean, there's so much I could say about this, but when you change the metric from numbers, like just eyeballs, which is what the Silicon Valley, surveillance capitalism's always been doing, to how am I actually helping a person to explore the world? How am I helping someone to feel impactful? Suddenly, the whole thing changes. The way you build things changes. The way we do things changes. The way you interact with services changes. Is Facebook helping me to express myself? Is Facebook helping me to belong to a group? Truly, is it really doing that? What's all this stuff trying to push me into another realm? All those dark patterns. That's not helping. How's that helping me feel stability? It's these kind of things that are really important, and these are things that we find are really that we're starting to measure more and more things against. Once again, if you're interested in human values, please get in touch. There's a lot that comes here. So I'll say quickly what the metaverse is missing in my head. Data ethics. Strap on a thing, do your thing. Where's that data going? How do I control that data? How do I decide what goes and what doesn't go? That needs to get solved. Really needs to get solved. It needs to be data privacy by default. This is becoming the norm in the decentralized web, in the web, in the move to the Web3, and this needs to go to the metaverse as well. This is something that we stick by and we find very interesting, is this human data interaction. If you've not looked into it, it's worth looking into. It kind of gives you some nice broad kind of guidelines of how to interact with data. Also, data portability. I mean, I don't understand. When I read about Tilt Brush, I was really worried that you weren't able to just take everything you've worked on and just take it and point it somewhere else. That needs to be, that's a right under GDPR. We need to be able to do that. Also, we need to be able to view source. There's got to be a way of viewing the source or seeing what's going on behind the scenes. I know that's quite scary for artists, but it's really important. That's how people learn how to write web pages, how to do these things. It's really important. And portable identity. I do not understand how I cannot move my identity from one service to another service to another service to another service to another service. It needs to be the case. In the work we're doing, we start to look at this thing called self-sovereign identity and look at the advantages and the disadvantages about how that works. How do you explain that? All those things are tricky, but it's something that needs to happen. You can't just log into another service and log into another service and log into another service and build another profile, build another profile, build another profile. Just no. And it can't be that Facebook owns my profile and then I have to log into Facebook to access my profile. That's just not. It's just not the way it should work. So I know we've got a little bit of time. Got less time than I thought because of the mix up at the beginning. I wanted to give a cautionary tale, and it's going to be really quick. And then I want to ask questions, or I want you to ask questions. Blended reality. It's great. There's some amazing things that can happen. But there's stuff like AR graffiti, and some people like it, some people hate it. There's a lot of kind of questions about it. Is graffiti? It's in AR, so no one sees it, or those kind of things. But I find it interesting. Contention. I think these are kind of quite interesting places because, especially in a space like this, where this is a public park, and then you put this thing in there, and now people are adding graffiti to it. Or if you look at what Snapchat did recently, you were able to kind of throw the snap lenses around and then cover Soho and stuff like that and stuff. But is that graffiti or is that not graffiti? Is it because it's a corporation it's not graffiti? Those are kind of interesting questions. And especially when you go to the real world, it gets more and more interesting, because then you suddenly get into this kind of cultural jamming. How can I then make changes on top of someone else's kind of AR graffiti or whatever they want to do? There's something quite important about cultural jamming, and if you don't know what cultural jamming is, then you have to look at some of the stuff that Banksy's done. This is the stuff I grew up with when I was in Bristol. I would also add this other side of it, which is there's a real problem with people distinguishing between reality and not reality. And I just watched a film called There's a Glitch in the Matrix, and they were talking about, so there was a guy who's on death row, I think death row, or he's in prison for killing his parents. And I'm not saying that this stuff will cause people to kill people, but it's all about, like, there's a blend, and we got to be careful. There's also there's quite a few people who, if you are familiar with ARGs, alternative reality games, then there was a lot of talk that actually QAnon, and I hate saying this, could be a massive alternative reality game. And that's quite scary, that people were taken in so much that they will storm the Capitol. That's quite scary, and we need to be more careful of that. So this also leads to, we need to have better tools to understand mis and disinformation, and unreality in this age of the metaverse. If we're not building those tools, we need to build those tools. They need to be available, because some people, you can have your own opinion about who those people are, but some people are taking it way too far, and taking it to be reality. If you want more, I do public service internet notes every month. You can subscribe by just going to this link and use an RSS reader, this back in the old days, or just message me and I can send you the details of how to get involved. That's it. Thank you for listening. Mark, if you would like to jump back in, then I can stop.
I think that was amazing, Ian. That was. Can we give this man a round of applause? Let's get the chat. Throw any shapes in there. Thank you very much. That was brilliant. I've been kind of looking at the chat, Ian, to try and grab some questions. A few questions are in there, and I've got a few musings that have come from there. So do you want me to sort of throw them at you? And
yeah, please do. Yeah.
Okay. So if you're in the chat and you've got a specific question, just throw it in, and I'll keep monitoring it. But I've picked a few things up. So one came from Keith. We'll start here, because then it'll take us to other places. And he says, with the public internet that you're sort of developing, thinking about putting together with this consortium, what do you think the public internet will be like in 5 years if there is a change for jobs and the economy? What does that look like from your point of view?
Oh, that's a big question.
Very big.
I'd like to break it down a little bit. I'd say, what would the internet look like if it had a more of a public interest? I would say that there'll be services which are unique to fulfilling people's human human rights, human values, more kind of humane kind of sites. So there'll be stuff like, for example, there was a site that Google created called I'm blanking on this stuff now. There's a site called it's called Schema. And Schema was really interesting, because Schema would basically, you say, these are things that I really want to do. These are like aspirational things I want to do, yeah? And then Schema would bring you together with people who also want to do that, but also, or maybe have even done that. So they're giving tips to each other. And Google, I don't know why they did that, but they kind of I think they just kind of lost control of it because it was really, really useful for the people, but it wasn't useful. It wasn't generating any money. It wasn't generating any kind of much data for them. So they just shut it down. And I always said that's something that always felt like a public service thing that should exist. Is important, but it's not a thing that Google would do. I also would say that I don't foresee that the public, I don't see it as a separate internet. I see it all as the internet, and there'll be services which are more public focused, and there'll be ones that will be. So if you go to Facebook, and you will know that it will use your data in this way because you will have a personal data store which will tell you, or some assistant that will tell you Facebook wants to use your data to do this, stuff like that. Does that kind of help?
Yeah, I mean, I did set you up with a big question.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it, I know. So I guess the question about jobs and stuff like that, I think there's a lack of public interest, and I think having more sites which are more public focus will enable different types of jobs. So, for example, one of my annoyances is that I live in a set of flats in Manchester, and we have a Facebook group, and every time someone wants to join, I have to. Well, we used to put ask them to give us their flat number, put a piece of paper in their post box. They would then send it, write it on the Facebook, and then we would then add them to the group. That just seems crazy because we should be able to have a localized node which just is like a Facebook group but isn't Facebook, and we're in complete control over it, and anyone that joins to our network, our subnet of the network, would automatically be added. That also means that when people leave, they would automatically be removed, rather than right now we have lots of people who are still on the site who have left a long time ago.
I mean, we're sort of getting into, I mean, we've only got a couple of minutes left, but this is kind of a blockchain kind of chat where you would bring in your sovereign identity into that building. It would connect while you're there, and then when you leave, it disconnects, and then you go to the next node, to the next building on the network. But I think, as you rightfully said, with the neighborhood metaverse concept of 50 strong people all hanging out in a certain digital space is brilliant. That's what kind of we do at Future Artists. There's a big bunch of us, yes, real core group, and then other people on the periphery, and then it gets wider from there. But it's all a numbers game with Facebook, because they've got shareholders. They've got to show the amount of users they onboard every quarter, and that then drives revenue. And each person's worth like $10 per, So they're two different approaches. One is because it's a public listed company. The other is utopia, maybe. I
wouldn't say utopia. I think it's not utopia. I think we value public service, and we value these public things, but we're not used to thinking about it in that way. We're starting to get to a point where we need to value these things in a different way because they enable other aspects which the others cannot do. So for example, shareholders are not interested in you having supporting your kind of not human rights, some of your human values, such as growing yourself. That doesn't really, unless they can find a way of making it fit with that, and sometimes it doesn't fit, and it's a different business model, and there are some things which are better as in a different business model.
So Ian, I'm gonna kind of wrap it up here because we're coming up to 5:00, and gonna get the next gang in here to have a talk. Anything else you want to add as a sort of closing statement? Anything we should be looking out for, if we can be the change, what should we be doing to be the change?
I would go back through some of the things I said about what's missing from the metaverse right now, because some of those are, like the data portability, the self-sovereign identity are things that need to get done, and I think anyone that starts to really chip away at that they could probably make a lot of money from it, but also would it just make the world so much better, yeah, and make the metaverse so much more accessible for many people.
Well, Ian, thank you very much. I mean, that gives a good segue into what Ryan Gill's going to be talking about with Crucible. I know he's going to be talking about sovereign identity and avatars and obviously the metaverse. So I just want to throw it out to the chat. Big round of applause. Thank you very much, Ian.
Thank you very much.
That's been brilliant. So everyone, we're going to sort of go. I'm going to switch the broadcast off now, and so sort of hang out, jump on the networking for a bit. Just give us about 5 minutes while I get the other guests onto the stage and make sure all their technical stuff is all working. So thank you very much. We'll see you all later. So Ian, just hang on there. I'm going to stop broadcasting and we'll have a quick chat.
Okay.